Ladies and gentlemen, by request of the chairman of the committee, who has been very busy and is very tired, I suppose, I ask leave to introduce to you the lecturer of the evening, Mr. Clemens, otherwise Mark Twain, a gentleman whose great learning, whose historical accuracy, whose devotion to science, and whose veneration for the truth are only equaled by his high moral character and his majestic presence. I refer in these vague and general terms to myself. I am a little opposed to the custom of ceremoniously introducing a lecturer to an audience, partly because it seems to me that it is not entirely necessary, where a man has been pretty well advertised, and partly because it makes a lecturer feel uncomfortably awkward. But where it is necessary, I would much rather make it myself. Then I can get in all the facts. But it is not really the introduction that I care for. I don't care about that. That don't discommode me. But it's the compliments that sometimes go with it. That's what hurts. It would hurt anybody. The idea of a young lady being introduced into society as the sweetest singer or the finest conversationalist. You might as well knock her in the head at once. She could not say a word the rest of the evening. I never had but one public introduction that seemed to me just exactly the thing. An introduction brimful of grace. Why, it was a sort of inspiration, and yet the man who made it wasn't acquainted with me. But he was sensible to the backbone, and he said to me, "Now, you don't want any compliments?" I said he was exactly right. I didn't want any compliments. And when he introduced me, he said, "Ladies and gentlemen, I shan't fool away any unnecessary time in this introduction. I don't know anything about this man. At least I know only two things. One is that he has never been in the penitentiary. And the other is, I don't know why." Such an introduction as that puts a man at his ease right off. Now, when I first started out on this missionary expedition, I had a lecture which I liked very well, but by and by I got tired of telling that same old stuff over and over again, and then I got up another lecture, and after that another one, and I'm tired of that. So I just thought tonight I would try something fresh if you are willing. I don't suppose you care what a lecturer talks about if he only tells the truth, at intervals. Now, I have got a book in press. It will be up pretty soon. Over 600 octavo pages and illustrated after the fashion of the Innocents Abroad. Terms. However, I'm not around canvassing for the work. I should like to talk a little of that book to you tonight. It is very fresh in my mind, as it is not more than 3 months since I wrote it. Say 30 or 40 pages, or if you prefer it, the whole 600. 10 or 12 years ago, I crossed the continent from Missouri to California in the old overland stagecoach, a good while before the Pacific Railway was built, over 1,900 miles. It was a long ride, day and night, through sagebrush, over sand and alkali plains, wolves and Indians, starvation and smallpox. Everything to make the journey interesting. Had a splendid time, a most enjoyable pleasure trip in that old stagecoach. We were bound for Nevada, which was then a brand new territory nearly or about as large as the state of Ohio. It was a desolate, barren, sterile, mountainous, unpeopled country, sagebrush and deserts of alkali. You could scarcely cast your eye in any direction, but your gaze would be met by one significant object, and that was the projecting horns of a dried, shrunken carcass of an ox, preaching eloquent sermons of the hardships suffered by those emigrants, where a soil refused to clothe its nakedness, except now and then a little rill, or as you might call it, a river, goes winding through the plain. Such is the Carson River, which clothes the valley with refreshing and fragrant hayfields. However, hay is a scant crop, and with all the importations from California, the price of that article has never come under $300 a ton. In the winter, the price reaches $800, and once went up to $1,200 per ton, and then the cattle were turned out to die, and it is hardly putting the figures too strong to say that the valleys were paved with the remains of these cattle. It is a land where the winters are long and rigorous, where the summers are hot and scorching, and where not a single drop of rain ever falls during 11 tedious months, where it never thunders and never lightens, where no river finds its way to the sea or empties its waters into the great lakes that have no perceptible outlet, and whose surplus waters are spirited through mysterious channels down into the ground. A territory broad and ample, but which has not yet had a population numbering 80,000, yet a country that produced $20 million of silver bullion in the year 1863, and produces 12 million to 16 million every year, yet the population has fallen away until now it does not number more than 15,000 or 18,000. Yet that little handful of people vote just as strongly as they do anywhere, and are just as well represented in the Senate of the United States as Michigan or the great state of New York with her 3 million or 4 millions of people. That is equality in representation. I spoke of the sagebrush. That is a particular feature of the country out there. It is an interesting sort of shrub. You see no other sort of vegetable, and clear from Pike's Peak to California's edge, the sagebrushes stand from 3 to 6 feet apart, one vast greenish-gray sea of sagebrush. It was the immigrant's fast friend, his only resource for fuel. In its appearance it resembles a venerable live oak with its rough bark and knotty trunk, everything twisted and dwarfed, covered with its thick foliage. I think the sagebrush are beautiful. One at a time is, anyway. Of course, when you see them as far as the eye can reach 7 days and a half in the week, it is different. I'm not trying to get up an excitement over a sagebrush, but there are many reasons why it should have some mention from an appreciative friend. I grant you that as a vegetable for table use, sagebrush is a failure. Its leaves taste like our ordinary sage. You can make sage tea of it, but anybody in this audience who has ever been a boy or a girl, or both, in a country where doctors were scarce and measles and grandmothers plenty, don't hanker after sage tea. And yet, after all, there was a manifest providence in the creation of sagebrush, for it is food for the mules and donkeys, and therefore many emigrant trains are enabled to pull through with their loads where ox teams would lie down and die of starvation. That a mule will eat sagebrush don't prove much, because I know a mule will eat anything. He don't give the toss-up of a copper between oysters, lead pipe, brick dust, or even patent office reports. He takes whatever he can get most of. In our journey, we kept climbing and climbing for I don't know how many days and nights. At last, we reached the highest eminence, the extreme summit of the great range of the Rocky Mountains, and entered the celebrated South Pass. Now, the South Pass is more suggestive of a straight road than a suspension bridge hung in the clouds, though in one place it suggests the latter. One could look below him on the diminishing crags and canyons lying down, 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 away to the vague plain below, with a crooked thread in it which was the road, and tufts of feathers in it which were trees. The whole country spread out like a picture, sleeping in the sunlight, and darkness stealing over it, blotting out feature after feature under the frown of a gathering storm. Not a film or shadow to mar the spectator's gaze. I could watch that storm break forth down there, could see the lightnings flash, the sheeted rain drifting along the canyon side, and hear the thunder crash upon crash, reverberating among 1,000 rocky cliffs. This is a familiar experience to traveling people. It was a miracle of sublimity to a boy like me, who could hardly say that he had ever been away from home a single day in his life before.